Is this a great game or what? With Tim and Jeff Kurkjian, another October edition, and today's guest is Bobby Valentine.
Right. And Jeff, I covered the first game that he ever managed in the major leagues when he was the manager for the Rangers. I was the beat guy for that team. So I go way back with Bobby. Bobby, of course, was a number one pick of the Dodgers, played for them in the big leagues at age 19. He also played for the Mets. He also managed the Mets. He also managed the Mets in the Subway Series in 2000. And Bobby Valentine knows more about Japanese baseball than anyone I've ever seen because he used to manage there. So everything that's going on right now, Bobby Valentine has his fingerprints all over. That's one reason that he's our guest this week.
Perfect, with the Yankees on the AL side facing the Cleveland Guardians and the Mets on the NL side facing the Dodgers. I mean, there's so much Bobby Valentine in this episode. We're excited to dive in, and we're excited to be here with you. Make sure to hit follow or subscribe wherever you're listening right now and share it with a friend. Dad, I know we only have, really division series games to talk about, but what takeaways do you have?
The first takeaway is this, Jeff. A couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, we got our nose hairs waxed in Montana. So I just assumed we were the only adult males ever to do this. So unfortunately, I told my dear friend Eddy Perez that you and I got our nose hair waxed, and he goes, "Oh, I do that every 2 weeks." Every 2 weeks. And then he showed me a picture of him getting his nose hairs waxed. He looked like a walrus. It was the dumbest thing I've ever seen. It's one of the funniest things I've ever seen. And he said, and I get my ears waxed every 2 weeks also. So we have an arrangement that when we're in New York for the Yankees against the Guardians, Eduardo and I are going to go get our noses waxed and our ears waxed. That's the big news of the week, Jeff.
That is incredible. I remember when I forced your hand to do this with me, I explained that this is more normal than you think, especially for us guys who are Armenian and have a lot of hair around us. It's only going to help you breathe better and look better. We can't have hairs flying out of our nose, especially you're on TV, Dad.
I know. I was just surprised to hear how many people have done this. And when Eduardo just shrugged his shoulders and said, every 2 weeks, it's the greatest. So there we go. All right, Jeff, the real takeaways for this week. And there were many of them, Jeff, because I just got back from the Yankees against the Royals. And now I've got the Yankees against the Guardians. But a couple things that stood out to me, Jeff, is just how important the changeup is in today's game. Seth Lugo of the Royals told me the changeup is the best pitch and the most important pitch in baseball today. So I saw elite changeups from Tarek Skubal, from Michael Wacha, from Luke Weaver, from Lugo. And it's in part because since everybody throws so hard, 98 miles an hour, that makes the changeup more important because you have to get out in front in order to get to 98. And if you're going out to get it, you're not going to catch that changeup. You have to choose between the two. And of course, if you're looking for the changeup, you'll never get to 98. So that was one thing that I've always known how important the changeup was, but Seth Lugo convinced me it's the most important pitch and the best pitch in the game today.
And it's the most embarrassing pitch, too. Nothing crazier than, with the amount of strikeouts we have, the amount of people swinging on a changeup.
But Jeff, changeups today, some guys throw their changeup at 90 miles an hour today. When I first started covering late 70s, early 80s, 90 was a really good fastball. Now it's a really fast changeup, which is amazing. The other thing, Jeff, that I've really gathered, again, which we all knew, is just how important bullpens are to teams today. Now, we've known this for 10 years, but every postseason, it becomes more of a factor. For instance, the Guardians are in the ALCS, and their starting pitchers were 50 and 57 this year. Their starters had a losing record. So I called Frank at the Elias and said, when's the last time a team got into the playoffs with sub 500 records from their starting pitchers, and not counting 2020, the shortened season. There were 4 teams that had a worse winning percentage from their starting pitchers than the 2024 Guardians. That's the 2023 Marlins, 2005 Padres, 1984 Royals. So, but it's just so amazing today how important it is to have a great bullpen. Because I've told you 100 times, Jeff, Davey Johnson told me you win in the postseason with a deep, versatile bullpen. And almost every team has that, because you're not going anywhere without one. The other thing I learned from Kansas City, Jeff, is that Kauffman Stadium, which I've been to 1,000 times, just not much lately because the Royals haven't been very good for 10 years until this year. It's just how big that yard is. Oh my gosh, Jeff. In the series we did, 2 games in Kansas City, there were 6 balls that I thought would have been home runs at Yankee Stadium. And not only one went out there, and that was Giancarlo Stanton's bomb to left center field. Just another reminder how important ballparks are to how you put your team together, and just what a difference. I mean, the juxtaposition of Yankee Stadium and Kauffman Stadium was just jarring to me. The other thing that I saw, Jeff, that I've never seen before, and I love this, when I did the Tigers-Astros series, Joey Cora, the infield instructor and third base coach for the Tigers, was hitting ground, little fungos 5 feet, 10 feet away from Spencer Torkelson, the first baseman, and Torkelson had a glove on each hand. So he would catch a ground ball with his left hand, which is his dominant hand. And then on his right hand, his throwing hand, he had another glove. As he told me, this is a great drill. It gets me to looking to my left, looking to my right. And Joey Cora said it gets both sides of your brain working at the same time. Jeff, 45 years I've covered baseball. I have never seen that before. And I just love every little fascinating trick that you use to try to make you a better baseball player. You're stunned, right?
I'm shocked. I've never heard of that, because to think to train your opposite arm to be catching, I mean, I'd give my right arm to be ambidextrous, but
good.
It's my dad's favorite line. I had to use it on
Good line, Jeff. Todd Frazier, who's been around and played on a bunch of teams, said he's never seen what Joey Cora does with his infielders. Speaking of never being seen, we checked with the Elias to double check this fact was straight. During the playoffs, the Padres became the first team ever to give up a grand slam in a game. They scored only in 1 inning of that game. They did not score after the second inning of that game, and they won the game. So It's the first time in the history of baseball, regular or postseason, that that's ever happened. Again, Jeff, this is why baseball is so beautiful. It's the first time ever, which is like my favorite sentence ever. The first time ever, even though it's redundant, but you have to put it in there for emphasis. First time ever that has ever happened. My last takeaway, Jeff, is the new closer of the Yankees, Luke Weaver, who had a phenomenal season. And because of that phenomenal season, became the closer of the Yankees. And one reason that the Yankees have a chance to go to and win the World Series is they have fixed the bullpen, and Luke Weaver is the reason that it is fixed. The point about him, though, Jeff, is he's 31 years old. He's with his 6th major league team. He's played for 5 teams in the last 3 years, but at age 31, the light has gone on. I mean, he throws 96 miles an hour with an elite changeup, but everything has come together. And Aaron Boone told us that Luke Weaver came into spring training and he had a new delivery. He had messed with his mechanics, and he kind of looked and was doing things that Yoshi Yamamoto of the Dodgers was doing. Nobody does that kind of stuff. And they're all looking at him like, what are you doing? But a week before spring training, it all kind of fell into place. It fell into place the whole season. And then the last 6 weeks, he's been a dominant pitcher in the major leagues, and he has solved the Yankee closer problem. Jeff, this is what I love so much about baseball is the light went on for him. We're not even sure what the light was, but it went on, and now he is a tremendous pitcher for the Yankees and gives them a better chance to win in the postseason.
You know, it's just so funny when you think about athletes and you say he's 31, implying that he's like old, right? Like older. And here I am, 31 years old, thinking,
right.
I don't feel that old. But in athletics, you kind of are, right?
Right. It's so great. And this is the other great thing about Luke Weaver is he did a post-game interview with Meredith Marakovich of the Yes Network, and she used the word inkling in a complete sentence. And Luke Weaver, who's very funny, great dry sense of humor, very smart, during his answer, he said, I'm going to pretend like I know what the word inkling means here, when he clearly did. So when we got to talking to him about that little interview he did, he said, you know, sometimes you guys ask us the same questions every time, and then you're disappointed that we give you the same answers. If you ask us some different questions, we might have some different answers.
Game changer of the week. Dad, who do you got?
Well, what I've got, Jeff, is a change of venue. Okay. For instance, the Royals lost 7 games in a row at home, and then they went on the road, a different look, a different situation, and they got hot and got themselves into the playoffs and then won in the first round of the playoffs. Sometimes just a change of scenery really helps. The Astros, who I did against the Tigers, told me that they started to turn it around when they went to Mexico and played a 2-game series completely out of their comfort zone, but that's when it turned. And the Tigers guys told me that their season turned when they went to Williamsport and won in the Little League World Series, that game that night in a walk-off against the Yankees. That's what they pointed to. And of course, the most important one is the Mets went to England. You remember that 2-game series against the Phillies, Jeff? You remember they lost game 1, and then they won that second game on the Sunday on that amazing 2-3 double play when Luis Torrens, their catcher, burst out from behind home plate, caught a ball, tagged home plate, and threw to first for a double play. The only time that play has ever happened to end any major league game in a 1-run situation like that one was. That was the point where the Mets said, all right, we're on our way. And it's so amazing to me and so beautiful to me that just a change of venue, a change of scenery, and sometimes one game can turn everything. And I think the Mets' amazing season turned with a 2-3 double play in, of all places, London.
What happened on this date in baseball history? I mean, there's got to be some great ones, especially because it's October.
Right. On this date in 1986, the Mets beat the Astros in 16 innings in Game 6 of the ALCS, one of the greatest games ever played. And I covered the 86 American League playoffs that year. And everyone who covered that one, including myself, thinks the Angels and the Red Sox was the greatest series they ever covered. But anyone who covered the National League playoffs that year, the Astros and the Mets, swears that was the greatest one ever. And that 86 16-inning game when the Mets beat the Astros 7-6 was unbelievable. And I would say, gosh, I wish I had been there. But I was at the American League Championship Series, and I wouldn't change that memory for anything. Also, on this date in 1988, Kirk Gibson hit the famous home run off of Dennis Eckersley to win Game 1 of the World Series. Remember, Jeff, Gibson couldn't even run. He had a hamstring injury. He couldn't run. So he's sitting with Orel Hershiser, my dear friend, and they're in the clubhouse, and they're listening to Bob Costas correctly tell everyone Kirk Gibson can't play tonight. He is just too injured to play. And Gibson, typical angry, competitive Kirk Gibson, got so mad, he said, I'll show them. And he calls down to the dugout and says, I'll be ready if you need me. He goes up in the 9th inning and hits a 3-run homer to win that game. And that ended the World Series in Game 1. The Kirk Gibson home run, one of the biggest home runs ever hit, ended the World Series after one game because the A's just weren't themselves after that.
One of the most iconic fist-pumping I mean, everybody does that as a kid. The first time you hit a home run, you got to do the Kirk Gibson, even though it's been, almost 40 years.
Right.
It's crazy.
And as I told you, Jeff, that's the first time I had ever heard the term walk-off home run, because Dennis Eckersley told it to me and a bunch of other writers. He said, well, he had a walk-off homer, and we all went, what? And he goes, well, yeah, he had a homer, and everyone walked off the field. That's the first time I've ever heard that. And it's my opinion that Dennis Eckersley invented the term walk-off homer, and it came from the Kirk Gibson game.
Wow. Dad, you're also credited with inventing another word, at least according to Webster's dictionary. What do you remember what I'm talking about?
No. What?
Yeah, so it is, I'm going to Google it right now, because it is known, at least according to Webster's dictionary, that Tim Kurkjian is the very first one to use F-bomb. Merriam-Webster's dictionary credits you.
That can't be.
Yes. Credits you as coining the term on national television, where you said, and he said an F-bomb. And you are credited as using that for the very first time in a formal sense, meaning they have to cite a source, right? So they cite you using that on ESPN. It's true.
I'm in the Webster dictionary for
absolutely
for the last thing I should be known for is an F-bomb, even though it was all true. Earl Weaver F-bombed me the first time I ever met him. I wonder if that's it.
Yeah, so the sentence or part of a sentence is accidentally dropped an F-bomb on television comes courtesy of Timothy Kurkjian, the Major League Baseball analyst of SportsCenter fame. A quick Google search reveals that Kurkjian, writing for ESPN's website, was referring to Astros pitcher Brad Lidge, who was overjoyed after his team clinched the National League wildcard spot that he dropped an F-bomb during a post-game celebration. So I guess you wrote it, not said it, but you wrote it, and this is according to Merriam-Webster, I mean, the number one source when it comes to where words came from.
Well, words are my business, Jeff. I don't want to be known as the F-bomb guy, but all right, I'll take it. I'll take it.
Well, this is important. Do you want this to be a part of your headstone one day?
No. We can do what?
Tim Kurkjian, born December 10th, 1956. Discovered the word F-bomb? No? You don't? No?
I think instead of that, we should have Tim Kurkjian, born 1956, discovered nose waxing 2024. What do you think?
It only took him 67 years to figure it out, but he did.
All right. Last thing, Jeff, on this date, Jim Palmer was born on this date in 1945. So Jim Palmer is 79 years old. He is 12 years older than me. He looks 20 years younger than me. And he was one of our best guests, Jeff. So, and we had so many great guests this year, and we're still going because we got Bobby Valentine today. So I thought for Team Tim, we would come up with our all team of guests. And of course, we have a guest at each position, which we do every week with Team Tim. So Johnny Bench is our catcher, right?
Every single one of these people have been a guest on the show. Johnny Bench, catcher, greatest catcher of all time. We start with him. It's perfect.
Right. And what's your takeaway? What do you remember from Johnny Bench's interview?
Listen, I have learned so much about interviewing people from you. But when you asked Johnny Bench, hey, can you still get in a crouch? And he looked at you and said, why? Like, why would I ever? Now, of course, he was poking fun and he was there for the bit, but that was my highlight of that interview. Right. And you can hear all these if you go back and scroll back if you missed any of these interviews. Okay, who do you have at first?
I have Ryan Zimmerman at first, and my takeaway there, Jeff, is when he described playing basketball with Max Scherzer, where you got to shoot free throws. It's a pickup game. You got to shoot free throws when you're really tired. So halfway through the pickup game, we're going to stop the game and shoot free throws. When the game is over, we're going to stop and shoot free throws. Agreed on that?
That was definitely my highlight. Can I guess who you have at second?
Yes.
Jerry Hairston Jr., right?
Way to go. And, of course, he talked about Jackie Robinson. And who else did he talk about? The active teammate that he covers.
Shohei Ohtani.
Right, and Mookie Betts.
My favorite Mookie Betts story that he said was one time Mookie was running late for a charity golf outing, runs up to the first tee, doesn't warm up, and is still moving, gets up there and hits a ball 300 plus yards.
Right. And he also said Mookie can play slot back in the NFL and could play point guard for the Lakers. That's how great a player that Mookie Betts is. All right, our third baseman is Todd Frazier, right?
Oh, Todd Frazier.
And what's your favorite Todd Frazier from the interview?
I mean, there's so many, but when he said, "All right, big dog," and did a Tim Kurkjian impression, it was by far my favorite.
Jeff, how about the when he did the basketball referee? His block call is the funniest thing I've ever seen. Oh God, it was so good. Okay, our shortstop, Jeff, is
Cal Ripken Jr.
Remember when his dad took him down to the workshop? Because his dad had a blood blister?
He had a blood blister, and he took a drill and popped it open, and it exploded like the 4th of July.
Right.
And, that just speaks volumes to, like, why was he the Iron Man? Why was Cal Ripken Jr. so tough? It came from his dad. Like, why am I such a nerd? It comes from my dad,
All right, good point. All right, outfield, we have Jeff Francoeur. I think we're in agreement. What was the best story he told this year?
Well, there's two. Okay, so the Bobby Cox story of when he had a chance to play with Tiger Woods. During spring training, Bobby Cox hears the rumblings in the clubhouse that Jeff Francoeur passed on an opportunity to play with Tiger Woods because he had a spring training game. So Bobby Cox comes to him and says, you gotta go. And he said, no, I can't do it. He said, okay, if you get on base in the first inning, just when you hit first base, just kind of clutch your leg a little bit, grab your leg, and so he does. He hits a grounder, he makes it to first base, pulls his leg, Bobby Cox pulls him out, he runs and is able to meet Tiger Woods on the first fairway, and then while he's out there on like the 16th or 17th green, Jeff Francoeur's wife texts him a screenshot that says, Jeff Francoeur, day-to-day.
High ankle sprain. He had a
high ankle sprain.
He didn't even get hurt. He faked it with the help of his manager. Jeff, there can't be another story. That's the...
Oh, well, you got to remember the time he finally actually beat John Smoltz in golf.
Oh, yeah.
Remember?
Yeah.
But he was playing 36 holes that day.
Right.
He was so excited he beat him in the first 18. He ran into the ocean. I think it was Pebble Beach, right? Ran into the ocean to celebrate, and he realized I got another 18 to play, so he had to buy clothes at the clubhouse. He said he spent over $1,000. Oh, that was so good.
Okay, second outfielder is Tito Francona, and of course there are so many Tito Francona stories. I'm not sure we can narrow it down at all, but that day, Jeff, that he and I went to Camp Wilderness on our first trip when he was with ESPN. They put us in a log cabin, 2 different log cabins in the middle of the woods. Instead of putting a 2-time World Series champion in some 4-star hotel, we were in a cabin in the woods. And it was like we were in the Cub Scouts. We had bunk beds in our room, and he calls me after like 10 minutes and says, hey, you want to come over? We can go out in the backyard and make some s'mores. That was my favorite Tito Francona story.
New manager of the Cincinnati Reds, so that's really exciting for him. Baseball is better when Terry Francona is a part of it, as you said.
Right, and Doug Glanville was our other outfielder. Doug, of course, told us all about the Negro Leagues. He told us all about the game in Birmingham. He told us about the game he played as an older guy, and he hit a ball that's, this is going to be a hit, and Dexter Fowler, who had just retired, ran the ball down, and he's wondering, why can't we have some really old guy in center field? I should.
Why is he allowed to play?
I should have had a hit there. It was great. Love Doug Glanville. And of course, our starting pitchers, Jeff, is Jim Palmer, who we've been over, and John Smoltz, who we've been over. We had Pete Fairbanks as our relief pitcher. Do you remember anything about that other than when he reads? If he's such a voracious reader, he might read a book in an entire day. What about the story he told about his mother reading to him?
They were reading Harry Potter together. They got through the first book. They started the second book. And after a couple pages, he kind of said, Mom, you're reading too slowly. I need to take this over.
Right. And how old was he? He was 6.
He was like 6.
Okay, our manager was Aaron Boone, who made us laugh like we haven't laughed maybe on any of these podcasts. And I will never forget when he did Moses Malone from the free throw line for us. And again, Jeff, you have to be my age to appreciate the level of detail when he did Moses Malone at the free throw line.
It's so perfect.
Right.
I love it.
And last thing, Jeff, what does Aaron Boone in his best Marv Albert voice, what does he say to Brad Ausmus?
So Brad Ausmus's last name backwards is Sumswa, and he's a coach on his staff.
Bench coach, right.
Every time he sees him, he goes, "Some swall for 3."
And Brad Ausmus just rolls his eyes that the Yankee manager would do that. And last guy, Jeff, is Chris Young, who is the general manager on our team because he's a former pitcher, of course. And my favorite story that he told was when he hit a triple in a major league game. The tallest man, 6'10", ever to hit a triple in a major league game. He figured they're going to stop me at second.
Right.
There's no way they're going to send me to third. This must be a stand-up triple. And then they see Glenn Hoffman like get down. He goes, "Oh my gosh, they're going to make me slide. I haven't slid in years." And he said, "I made the worst slide in the history of baseball. I almost killed Miguel Cabrera, the third baseman." That was my favorite story. Instead of asking him, "Hey, when's Jacob deGrom going to be back?" we asked him, "Tell us about the triple you hit in the major leagues."
I have 2 more positions on the Best of All Tim team. The chief communications officer is Lindsay Berra, who is the granddaughter of Yogi Berra. And, she was so fantastic, putting in perspective for us, and that was Veterans Day weekend, her grandfather's service to this country, and told so many great stories, including the story about how Bob Feller did not want to talk to Yogi Berra because Bob Feller was such a staunch veteran and only cared for people who wanted to serve their country during this time. But Yogi Berra was very quiet about his service. So Bob Feller didn't know that Yogi Berra had served the country until they found out, and then he became friends with him. Lindsay Berra told us that story. And, Dad, it's a toss-up between Carl Ravitch and Jason Benetti as the Best of All Tims play-by-play broadcaster, because they were both fantastic guests.
We've had some stunningly good guests on, and if we left anybody out, we're sorry, because so many of them made us laugh. A couple of them made us cry. It was all so good. So that's our Team Tim for the week, and it's all based on Jim Palmer's 79th birthday, and we looked at all of our guests. Great fun this year, Jeff.
So before we get to Bobby Valentine, who is our guest today, we're going to talk to him about a potential Subway series. We're going to talk to him as well about some crazy history that just happened this past weekend. It was the first time in Major League Baseball playoff history that 2 Japanese-born pitchers faced off against each other. I have that right, Dad?
Yes, Yoshi Yamamoto and Yu Darvish pitched against each other. Both of them pitched exceptionally well, and that's why we went to Strat-O-Matic. Tell us what Strat-O-Matic did for us.
Well, Dad, you put together your all-Japanese team. These are Japanese-born players to play Major League Baseball. And fitting because the New York Mets have advanced to the National League Championship Series, and Bobby Valentine, clearly a great connection to the Mets. He played for them, and he was a manager for them for a long time. We decided to put this year's 2024 Mets up against the all-Japan team to see how a 7-game series would shake out. Now, Dad, I'm going to put your all-Japan team up on our Twitter and Instagram at Great Game or What if you want to see who was chosen for all of those spots.
Right.
Because we don't really have time to dive into each position there because we already did a Best of All Tim. In just 5 games, the all-Japan team, led by Yu Darvish, permitted just 2 runs in those 2 starts in 13 innings. Japan takes down the Mets in just 5 games.
Wow, I'm not surprised by that because in putting together the all-Japanese team, we've got Shohei Ohtani, we've got Ichiro. The starting pitching is just incredible with Darvish and Nomo, and we only used Ohtani as a DH, not as a DH/pitcher, but it just shows you how many great players have come from Japan. Bobby Valentine himself told me, and we'll ask him about this, he told me maybe 20 years ago, every starting position player in Japan could make a major league team. They wouldn't be stars, all of them, but he said everyday position player in Japan could make a major league team. That's how talented Japanese baseball is.
Thank you so much to our friends at Strat-O-Matic, the market leader in sports simulations. And we've got a couple more weeks left of those great simulations, so we're going to be bringing those to you. If you have any suggestions, greatgameorwhat.com. Speaking of Bobby Valentine, Dad, he's our guest. We've got him coming up next.
Well, Bobby taught me as much about baseball as anyone I've ever been around. Earl Weaver, Buck Showalter, Bobby Valentine. Those are the three guys that taught me, because I was a very young writer when he became the manager of the Rangers in the mid-'80s, and the stuff I learned from him was unbelievable. His understanding of the game, the way he could explain things, the way he worked with people. He's one of the best managers I've ever been around, and he's been to a lot of places.
Bobby Valentine joins the podcast coming up next.
Welcome back to Is This a Great Game or What? And our guest this week is our dear friend, Bobby Valentine, who played for the Dodgers. He played for the Mets. He managed the Mets in the last Subway Series. He knows more about Japanese baseball than anybody. He's the perfect guest for this week. Bobby, this is my son, Jeff. We do a podcast together.
Hi, Jeff. Hi, Tim. Hey, with that introduction, I'm just going to go. I don't need to be on the show, okay? That's cool. Let people Google me. Who? He did what? Holy jeez, I want to hear about that guy, but I don't want to talk because then they'll know I really know nothing. You know what I mean, Tim?
Jeff, Bobby taught me more about baseball than almost anyone I've ever been around.
And Jeff, just so you know, I got to tell you this. Your dad's spectacular. We worked together. We played together. And we did the whole thing. And one time he said, and, you know, and this Bobby Valentine taught me more about baseball than anybody else I've ever been around. And then he had to do a show with Buck Showalter. And Buck said, how can you say that, Tim? How can you say that you learned more from him than anybody else? And so now Tim says, almost anybody else, okay? Busted.
I've said it before. Buck, Bobby, and Earl Weaver talked me more about baseball than anyone. I can't leave Earl out of the equation.
Bobby, it's so fitting because your first year as a major league manager was with the Rangers, 1985, and my amazing but dinky sports writer dad was covering the team as the beat writer. Now, here we are almost 40 years later on this podcast, and both of you have had quite amazing careers since then. Can you take me back? Do you remember working with him?
Jeff, are you kidding? 1985. I can't remember 2020. 1985, Jeff. Of course I remember when he came in. Hey, Jeff, we were trying to educate an entire community of what baseball was. They thought the Texas Rangers, the team I was managing, we had horses and hats and we kept law and order. Texas Rangers baseball, what's that? We were in football country. Are you kidding? And your dad did a spectacular job, along with another group of bandits there who all became nationally renowned, educated entire community about baseball, which is now a real good baseball community. But believe me, in 1985, with a minor league stadium and an owner who was like half here and half not here, okay, who went on the microphone one day during the game in the seventh inning and he said, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. And then they hired me. Think about that stuff.
Jeff, Bobby's right. They tried to reinvent and educate everyone, including hiring Tom House as the pitching coach. Tom is one of my favorite people then and now. And Tom was the one that brought in throwing footballs for the pitchers in order to strengthen their arm. I just got back from Kansas City, Bobby. Pitchers for the Royals are throwing footballs in the outfield 40 years later after Tom House. So I remember Bobby asking Charlie Huff, one of our favorites, of course, does throwing the footballs help the pitchers? And he looked at me and he said, I don't know, but we lead the league in third down conversions, which was classic Charlie Huff.
It was Charlie Huff who Jeff, for whatever it's worth, played for me then. I played with him, right before he threw the third home run to Reggie Jackson in the 77 World Series. And then later he became a coach of mine in New York. So Charlie Huff's one of those names that's true and dear, who I was just with last week, who said to me, Bobby, why hasn't any organization hired Tom House to be their pitching coordinator, to be their pitching guru? He knows more about pitching than any two people who ever lived, and that's a fact. Understand, Jeff, at this time, I had a choice between having an advanced scout. We all know what advanced scouts are, right? The guy who goes on the road and sends you back written reports on what the other team was doing. The choice of either having an advanced scout or putting a satellite dish on the roof of the clubhouse so I could watch games. At the time, 1985. Okay, 1985. I had just worked for ESPN in the early 80s. All right, I did like their first baseball game, I think, ever. The Maine Black Bears against the Yukon Huskies doubleheader during the fall season. When ESPN had a flatbed truck and a big satellite dish, and they used to point the dish up at these satellites, and it would steal free time on different satellites. And if you had a satellite dish at your place, these 15-foot big monstrosities and had a little joystick that could turn the satellite, you could pick up the game. So I said to the owner, I wanted to watch the American League games because I was a National League guy. And he said, well, son, I'll tell you, that's in our budget. Well, you could have one of these satellite dishes or you could have an advanced scout. Well, I fired my advanced scout, which made me the most hated guy in the entire scouting community, and baseball community, okay? Because this guy was one of the great guys of all time. And if that's not enough, I got the scout. I got to do the video. Tim tells you with Tom House, we got a computer. We started doing all the nonsense. We brought in Gideon Ariel, who was the throws coach for the Israeli Olympic team, because Tom says this guy knows more about advancing things forward than any 10 people in the United States. We brought in Gideon to our spring training, into our major league complex. And we started digitizing players. But the rest of the story about firing Dick Gurnett, the advanced scout, who's a great guy, don't get me wrong, a great guy, I became the Met manager in 1995. And guess who quit as the advanced scout? Yes, Dick Gurnett.
Before we get to what's going on right now in baseball, I want you to tell the story, please, because if you don't tell it, I'm going to tell the story about you getting to the big leagues for the first time, 19 years old for the Dodgers. And your manager, of course, was Walter Alston, who's a Hall of Fame manager, one of the great managers of all time. Tell me about his relationship with you and his identification of you.
Well, Walter's Hall of Fame manager, and I'm not going to say anything bad about anybody in the Hall of Fame, except for he was missing a step by the time I got there in 72. And the only reason he stayed on as manager is so that Tommy Lasorda wouldn't become manager, because he despised Tommy more than he despised me. But anyway, at the welcome home dinner, this is a big deal. We're playing the Freeway Series out against the Angels, and the Angels and the Dodgers would have this breakfast together to welcome both teams back from spring training before the season would start. And the managers from the respective teams would get up and introduce the players. And 2 years, not 1 year, 2 years consecutively, 71 and 72, as I made the team, Walt introduced me as Billy Valentine. And when Danny Ozark, who was a spectacular guy, who was the third base coach of the team, said, don't worry, I told him it's Bobby. And I said, yeah, well, what the heck did he say? What did he say? He says, well, we got a lot of Billies. What's one more? And what's the big deal with one more? So, yeah, that's how I was introduced twice as, and he always called me Billy until he traded me.
Including in the elevator that day, right? Tell that story.
One day in Philadelphia, my mom and dad drive down to the game. It's a big deal for my dad to leave Stamford, get out again. He drives down with my Uncle Mike sitting check at the wheel, making sure that he can get to Philadelphia. He gets in. We check in at the same time. We get on the elevator at the same time. And he gets on and I said, oh, Skip. Walt was with my mom and dad. And I said, this is my mom and dad. And he kind of nodded. He was smoking a cigarette in the elevator. It was okay at that time, but he smoked a cigarette all the time, okay? And he blew out the puff of smoke and he said, okay, Billy, thanks. And then got off. I'm going to tell you, my dad was 5'7". Walt was like 6'3". My dad wanted to chase him down the hallway. He wanted to chase him down. I'm telling you, because I said he probably doesn't know my name, Dad. It's one of those things. It's sure he did.
All right, Bobby, back to those days when you were the best running back in the history of
Oh
Connecticut,
God.
and you were going to replace O.J. Simpson as a running back at USC, which is amazing. You
Tim,
were
that's what John McKay said. He was the coach, and he told me that if I came to SC, I would get number 32 because I wore 32 in high school, and I would replace OJ because that's the line I was on. Now that I know I've been an athletic director for 8 years, and I've been around the block a couple times, he probably told 22 running backs that same thing, who were all recruited the same year as I was. But anyway, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, John McKay, by the way, was an NFL coach, and his team was terrible. And one of the writers asked him after a terrible loss, what do you think about your team's execution? And he said, I'm in favor of it. I've never met John McKay in my life, and he's
legendary.
He's my biggest fan. That is really, really great. All right, so Bobby, you were also a ballroom dancer of tremendous fame. How good were you, and can you still do that today? Because Jeffrey is a great dancer. I, of course, am the worst dancer ever. I'm more wooden than Pinocchio. Nobody is worse than me. Where did ballroom dancing come from for you, and are you still good at it?
I just had a knee replacement, Tim. 2.5 weeks ago, I just got off a plane, flew across the country. I could probably do the foxtrot and the waltz right now. I couldn't do the jitterbug or the tango, too many dips, you know what I mean? But, I was an athlete growing up. My mom and dad were first-generation Italians. My mom said, hey, you're not only going to be a sport guy, you need some culture, too. You need some culture. I said, yeah, Ma, what culture? She said, you either take a singing lessons or you're going to take a dance lessons because that's a culture for you. And I said, well, I can't sing, Mom. And I wound up down at the Italian Center on the line of one side of the room with the girls on the other side, and they'd play music, and you go over and find a partner and you dance. And 4 years later, I had a steady partner. We practiced 5 times a week. We entered competitions in places like the Waldorf Astoria, the Edison Hotel. Finally won a regional competition that won me a trip to Florida and danced at the Fontainebleau Hotel in the International Ballroom Championships in 1965, and won the International Ballroom Dance Competition. And that was in the high school level. I was 15. She was 3 years older than me. She was a senior at the time. And we were spectacular. You had to know the steps. You did the regulation steps, and then you did a freelance, and you wore a tuxedo, and the girl wore the flowing gowns, and the judges walked around the floor with a little scorecard. And there were people from all around the country, and then in Florida, all around the world. It was as cool a competition as I've ever been in. For about 3 years, I did this competitively, where there was pressure. You needed teamwork, you needed rhythm, you needed timing, you needed presence. And luckily, she had all those things, and we won.
I think it's really funny that my dad asked the question about dancing, because when you brought up the foxtrot, he had no idea what you were talking about. He was trying to think of a Jimmy Fox or a Trot Nixon story that he could feel comfortable. He doesn't know the difference between the waltz and Tim Walz. Okay, right. So for him, this went right over his head. But no, Bobby, I think it's so important, and we've talked to so many guests about the importance of playing multiple sports, or in this case, right, you were a great football player, obviously a great baseball player, you were a dancer. All of that translates, the timing of dancing. Listen, I was never a great baseball player, but that has to help you out there, does it not?
Oh, it really helps you. It helps you with, like I said, there's teamwork involved. Balance is paramount, and rhythm. I became best friends with Willie Davis, the center fielder of the Dodgers, and Richie Allen, who came in '71 when I was a rookie with the Dodgers. And the reason I was really good friends with them is because I would go out and dance in the same clubs that they would dance at. And they said, oh, this dude's okay. We like this guy, because I'd be on the floor with them while they were doing it. And Willie Davis, who was number 3, they called him the 3 Dog, he was a center fielder, all-star with the Dodgers, one of the fastest runners I've ever seen. His whole thing about hitting hitting was you went into the box and you danced when you were in the box. So he had this rhythm going. And you see a lot of players who, other than Ohtani, who gets into the box and has no rhythm until it begins, and then his rhythm is so quick and spectacular that you can hardly see it. But I think he stands like that because he knows everyone brings a camera to take a photograph, and he just is so stoic. Have you ever seen anyone stand so still? It's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. Now, Bobby, help me here. Eduardo Perez, my broadcast partner, just said on the air the other day that all hitters have their mouth open at the plate, except for Ohtani, whose mouth is always closed during every at-bat. This is how you catch a fly ball, mouth open. This is how you hit, mouth open. Shohei's mouth is always closed. Do you understand at all what Eduardo is saying here? Does it make any sense? Because I don't understand it.
No, I think he made it up, to tell you the truth. Because can you imagine a boxer with his mouth open? Come on. Let's get real on this one. How about a swimmer with his mouth open? Come on, let's go.
No,
a lot of athletes, you do things without your mouth open. But one thing about Ohtani you want to watch and your viewers should understand is that when he stands at the box, his bat is straight up and down. And if you stand with your bat up straight up and down, it has no weight to it. And that's kind of the concept. If you hold the bat down over your shoulder, the head of the bat, the gravity will take it and you'll feel the weight and you'll be trying to hold it up. But as soon as you hold it straight up, so the knob's pointing straight down, the head's going straight up, there's no weight involved at all. And that's why an 102-mile-an-hour fastball, his bat seems so light, because I guess it feels so light. Huh?
Right. Bobby, how do we describe Shohei Ohtani in historical terms?
We describe him as the guy who went to Carnegie Hall with all the other concert pianists, and he's conducting the concert. He's the Mozart. He's a little different than everyone else. He has a special gene about him that differentiates him from I believe anybody else who ever played the game, in not only in his preparation and his intensity and his willingness to sacrifice, but also in his spectacular physique and ability. He's just different, and when you look at it, you have to appreciate it as being different. Sometimes people look at it as different, and in Japanese, the word for different and the word for wrong happens to be the same word, okay? And in this case, it's not wrong, it's right, and it's different.
What is the word, Bobby?
Chagaimas.
And
the verb chagaimas.
How good is your Japanese today?
僕の日本語はとてもいいでしょうね、Tim san desu ne. I said my Japanese is really good, isn't it, Tim? And I said it perfectly.
What was it like when you first started to manage in Japan? Did they look at you like, who are you and what are you doing here? Or was that transition from big league baseball to Japan really smooth?
Oh, it was anything but smooth. And understand, I had a guiding light. I had the shortstop from the greatest teams ever of Japan. The Tokyo Giants of the 50s and 60s won 9 straight championships. The guy who hired me was the shortstop on that team. Of course, Sadahara was on that team. Nagashima was on that team. And they were unbeatable, unstoppable. And their core of players, similar to our core from the early days, were the hierarchy of Japanese baseball. They knew all. They said all. I was ushered in by the shortstop, who was the general manager, who took a year in the United States, traveling the United States, to try to pick the first guy to ever lead the United States and be the first non-Japanese there. But I was challenged with everything. And a lot of the baseball there was a little different than ours. And probably the biggest thing I was challenged on was pitch count and swing path, where, you mentioned Tom House. My think tank people in Texas had Tom Robson as the hitting coach. Tom Robson continued what Ted Williams believed to be the proper swing path, which is now the accepted swing path of all players, because you can't swing down, you have to swing up because of the head of the bat and gravity and all that nonsense that applies. But in Japan, it was an everyday confrontation. No. And you know what they would do is I would say something and they would say, sodas. And they would agree that they heard what I was saying, but they never agreed with what I was saying. Huh? And it was absolutely spectacular, with Sadahara demonstrating with me with a samurai sword how to hit through a bundle of sticks 3 foot long. You tie them together, you hang them, and they hang loose, and you take a samurai sword, and if you hit these perfectly on the right angle on the downswing, you could go through this 40 pieces of wood like that. And if you hit it at the wrong angle, the sword would bounce back like it was off of a trampoline. And it was spectacular. That's the way he learned to swing, and it was a downstroke. And finally, I realized that the sword had no weight up on the top of it. At the top was the lightest part of the object that he was swinging, and the bottom and the handle was the heaviest, where the bat has the heaviest part on the top and the lightest part on the bottom. And that creates that different angle because gravity takes the head of the bat as soon as it goes down this way. It pulls it down, and then you have to pull it up to swing. But it took me a whole year, and finally at the end of the year, we went out to a spectacular sushi dinner. The sake was pouring, the beers were pouring, everyone was loose and feeling good, and Sadahara and Hiroka, my general manager, looked at me and said, "Bobby, we want to tell you something." I said, "Please, please, please." They said, "You're right about the swing." And there was silence. And they said, "But please, don't tell the players anymore. You'll only confuse them." And I thought that was spectacular. The only rules are the rules of physics that apply. And if you adapt the rules of physics to that swing, you'll understand what the swing is. And everyone should be swinging the same way as far as I'm concerned.
That is so great. Jeff, ask Bobby, getting away from baseball for 1 second, about his famous invention. Let's see if he agrees with us.
Well, I mean, you're a dancer, you're an athlete, you're a manager, but you're also a bit of a restaurateur. And I heard that you may have invented what we know today as the wrap. Is this true?
I'd like to think of it as a creation, Jeff. This stuff invention. I was in the kitchen. It was a creation. Yes. As a matter of fact, when I became the manager of the Red Sox, I think I was the manager of the Red Sox. Anyway, I was doing something up there in New England, North New England, and the Wall Street Journal came and asked me the same question, and I said, "Well, I don't know if I created it or not, but I know that no one else was doing it when I did it." And so they did a 2-month research project to try to prove me wrong, to try to prove that there was a wrap sandwich on a menu before it was on my menu in 1981. And they couldn't find one of those menus, so they said, "Okay, it is. It's true. He created the wrap." And the whole thing is, I started restaurant business. I did it for 38 years, by the way, for whatever it's worth. I had 7 of them open for 25 years consecutively. And at one time, I was the only celebrity athlete to have more than 3 restaurants opened at the same time for more than 20 years. I said, I'll never cook. I'm going to own a restaurant, but I'm never going to cook. That's for other people. They're going to cook. And sure, one Friday lunch, my guy doesn't show up in the kitchen, and we have a line out the door, and I say, "Oh, I better go and flip some hamburgers." While I was in there, the guy who gave me the loan to open the restaurant, the banker from across the street, came in, and he always ate club sandwiches. We didn't have club sandwiches on the menu, but for him, we'd make a club sandwich. He was the guy who gave me the $30,000 to open the place. You got it, Mr. Burke. Okay, well, my number one waitress, Debbie, comes in and says, "Oh God, Mr. Burke's out there." I said, "What's the problem?" She says, "Oh, the toaster's broke. We can't make the club sandwich." And I said, "Holy cow!" And next to me, the guy was putting the tortillas into the deep fryer to make tortilla chips. Cutting up the 10-inch tortilla shell. And I said, "Don't worry, we'll send them out a club sandwich in a second." So I took a 10-inch tortilla shell. I put all the ingredients of a club sandwich in it. I rolled it up. I put a couple of American cheese slices on the top. I put it underneath the salamander to melt and keep the tortilla from opening up. I cut it in half. I gave it to Debbie with some French fries on it and said, "Give it to Mr. Burke and tell him it's a club sandwich Mexican style." And 2 weeks later, we had it on the menu as a club Mex.
And all because the toaster was broken.
The toaster broke. The mother of creation was necessity, huh?
That is so great. Jeff, Bobby once told me how to make chicken parm because, as you know, I cook every meal at our house. I'm terrible. We pray after we eat at my house, believe me. But Bobby explained the better way to do chicken parm, like just when you're done, put some extra sauce on the top and all this. And it was way better because so not only did he teach me about baseball, he taught me about chicken parm also.
Tim, those are spectacular days. And these are spectacular days. Think of the Mets and the Dodgers. Think it might be again the Mets and the Yankees. This is truly baseball. This is what the country needs. I don't know, Mets, Yankees. I mean, that was spectacular in 2000, but I think some of the country didn't really get into it because it was a New York kind of thing. You know what I mean? But the Mets Dodgers should be spectacular.
Right. And Bobby, tell us about that Subway Series. I covered every second of it, but what was that like for you, a New York guy, and you've got the Yankees against the Mets in the World Series? What was that like for you?
It was exhausting, Tim, to say the least. I think, one of the jobs during this time of the year that the manager has, and that the players have too, is to eliminate distractions. Right? Everyone tells you got to be in the moment, you got to be in that zone, you got to, in order to play. The Mets playing the Yankees in a Subway Series, you couldn't eliminate the distractions. What you had to do is try to have less distractions than the other guys. Now, the other guys happened to be there before, the New York Yankees, with Hall of Famers all around on their team, and they came from kind of back to front because they got hot during the playoffs. They weren't that good during the season, and we were just churning along. We were hot. We were making it happen. And then the biggest distraction ever happened when, David Justice decided that the ball that Todd Zale hit wasn't a home run. Everyone in the stadium in game one, Todd Zale, Andy Pettit on the ropes. We're ready to win game one of the World Series. He hits the ball off the wall. Timo Perez, who was the hottest hitter the Mets ever had in the playoffs. I think he set a record for the most hits in a series against St. Louis. Is on base with another hit, and now he thinks it's a home run. Cookie Rojas decides to send them from third around towards home. David Justice picks up the ball and flings it to a guy who wasn't even in position because he thought it was a home run. His name was Derek Jeter, who runs over towards the left field line, catches the ball on the run, throws the ball off his right foot, makes a strike to home plate, of course, and Timo Perez got tagged out, and that became as big a distraction as anything that we ever had. We were going without it. We were accepting Timo, who came out of nowhere, who was signed out of the Dominican to play in Japan, and then signed, it's kind of stolen away from the Japanese team, and then all of a sudden wound up on our big league team. I don't even know how the heck it happened, but it happened, and he was hitting, and he was doing a really good job, and most of the guys on the team didn't even know what his name was. They were calling him Teeny half of the time. His name was Timo. And now this little star out of nowhere gets thrown out of home plate and we wind up allowing Andy Pettitte to stay in the game instead of getting into their bullpen, in the middle of their bullpen, which is a weak part of their team. And the rest is kind of history. The distractions continued. But it was spectacular, Tim. Everyone on every street corner. And anybody who you ever met called and asked for tickets. Anybody you ever passed on the subway was asking you for an autograph. It was the most amazing situation I was ever put in.
Right. Hey, Jeff, tell Bobby about the Strat-O-Matic simulation that we did, okay?
So we work with our friends at Strat-O-Matic, who are the market leader in sports simulations. Sure. And, looking ahead of this week, we were like, okay, we have Bobby Valentine. What are we going to do to kind of – we try to channel these things around our guests or around what's happening in baseball. So my dad put together the all-Japanese Major League Baseball team. So he does the best of all Tim. He'll list out – he's done things as silly as the all-eclipse team, where names that have to do with moons and lunar and all that stuff. I
worked with him. Jeff, I worked with him. I know.
He has a lot of time on his hands, right, Bobby?
I know.
But for this week, he did the all-Japanese team, the best players to ever play that are Japanese-born Major League Baseball. And we were thinking, okay, who are they going to play? Well, we thought it was great. With you, former Mets player and manager, we had them up against the 2024 Mets, and not really fair because we've got an all-star team. And my dad even said earlier, anybody who's playing, and you said anybody playing, starting in Japan right now, could make a Major League Baseball team. That's how good the teams are and the players are out there. They won in 5 games over the 2024 Mets.
Players who play there can make a Major League team here. That's a fact. Whether they'd want to is the thing. Everyone says, well, why don't they just all come over here then? Well, why would they want to? They have the best cars. They have great adulation. They play before 30,000 people. There's 8 national newspapers that cover them every day and a few sports magazines. They're on the top of the food chain. Why come and eat this food? You know what I mean? Why come and learn a new language? And there's a lot that should be said about that, about the players who can acclimate themselves to a different culture, whether it's going that way or this way. And right now, I think there's like one American who started in Japanese baseball this year. They had a couple Dominicans and Puerto Ricans, and you're allowed 4 foreigners, but there's like one American-born guy. So they don't really need the talent from here to make their league a good league.
Right. Bobby, this has been an absolute blast being with you. You were our perfect guest for this week because you got your fingerprints all over this postseason in so many ways. Mets, Yankees, Dodgers, Japanese baseball. So thank you so much for joining us. We could have kept you for 3 hours, but you've got work to do today. And I'm going to New York today to do the Guardians against the Yankees. But I wanted to thank you, and I especially wanted to thank you on behalf of my son, Jeff, for being part of our podcast today.
Well, Tim, good being with you. And Jeff, for whatever it's worth, you're a lucky guy. Your dad's a real special one that's admired by most people who have ever met him. Good luck to you guys. Great being on this podcast. Enjoy.
Thank you so much to Bobby Valentine for being our guest this week. What a great perspective when it comes to a Subway Series, to Japanese players, to the Mets and the Dodgers. It's just the perfect guest for this week. And thank you for listening and being with us throughout this whole season.
Right. So Bobby told me something once about Japanese players because he managed there for so long. And again, we repeat, Japanese players are so good. They are so disciplined. They are so hardworking. But he once told me there are 2 types of players in Japan, those who smoke and those who smoke a lot. He told me he had 3 players on one of his teams that if they weren't coming up like in the first 3 or 4 batters of that inning, they would go smoke a cigarette in between innings, which just amazed me. How can you do that and be a great a great player in Japan or a great player here? I'm guessing that Yamamoto, Darvish, and Shohei do not smoke cigarettes, and I'm sure they don't smoke them in between innings.
For the Hall of Famer Tim Kurkjian, I'm Jeff Kurkjian. Thank you for listening, and as always, thank you for being a part of our family.